when you have an erratic, chaotic administration in the first 2 weeks, one in which there's already been a dozen lawsuits, 3 different temporary restraining orders issued against your administration, in which you can't get anything straight, including how to implement your policies, how to execute on your executive orders. And you're already having a war breakout between your Department of Justice and the FBI in broad daylight during confirmation hearings. People are questioning whether Donald Trump is fit for office or whether he should be removed under the 25th Amendment, an amendment put in our Constitution in 1967. I'm going to talk about whether there are grounds to remove him under the 25th Amendment. What does it mean? What are the procedures? What happened during the first Trump administration? And when will or can someone pull the trigger on the 25th Amendment? You're on Legal AF. Let's get to it. 25th Amendment, I've seen a lot of conversation about it, which is expected. When you have a administration that's circling the drain in the first 2 weeks, with the track record I've just outlined, with even people within the Trump administration already resisting the Trump administration, when you have the acting chief of staff or the newly appointed chief of staff for U.S. aid banning and blocking the doors to tell Donald Trump he's not going to allow Elon Musk and Doge in, and gets fired, and he was a part of the Trump administration. That just happened. When you have inspectors general who are being dragged out, kicking and screaming from their offices because they refuse to acknowledge an illegal order firing them, at the same time, you've got the FBI and the acting director of the FBI telling the Department of Justice to go F off and do something even more anatomically impossible in public, because they don't want to turn over a list related to who the FBI worked on the Jan 6 cases. When you have 3 separate federal judges, right? Judge Kavanaugh, Judge McConnell, and Judge Ali Khan in Seattle, in Rhode Island, in the District of Columbia, all blocking and banning executive orders by Donald Trump. And you're only 2 weeks in with a dozen lawsuits. Reasonable people have to question whether this guy's going to make it and how you take him out in the meantime. 25th Amendment's a little bit tricky. I know it's fun to write it for Scaramucci, who used to be a communications director for about 11 days or whatever it was with the Trump administration. And we like Steve here on the network, but let's get into the mechanics of it. So the 25th Amendment says that if the president is ultimately removed, either voluntarily or involuntarily, the vice president becomes the president for that time period. Could be temporary, could be permanent. Vice president here, of course, J.D. Vance. Be careful what you ask for. Question is, are you going to be jumping out of the frying pan into the fire with a younger but just as unstable J.D. Vance running the party and running MAGA? I mean, do I want a 39-year-old, Yale grad, Rhodes Scholar, implementing Trump's policies? Not so sure about that, but let's leave that aside for a minute. Let's say we want to, or let's say others wanted to. The other problem is under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, which has, again, never been invoked, but is on the books. It says that if the vice president, so you got to get J.D. Vance on board, and a majority of the cabinet, those are the major cabinet positions around Donald Trump, from the big 4, Secretary of State, Department of Justice, Attorney General, Treasury, and State Treasury, Department of Justice, and one more will come to me, the big 4, and all the rest, Commerce, Small Business Administration, Education, all of that. They all have to get together. And they have to, a majority, not a supermajority, but a majority of the cabinet positions, plus the vice president, so he's got that deciding vote, must determine that the president, Trump, cannot discharge his duties any longer, right? He's, there's something preventing it. The mental incapacity, mental instability, putting America on the verge of war around the country, war with allies like Greenland, Panama, and Mexico, and Canada. We got Donald Trump standing up at podiums telling people that he hasn't ruled out taking Greenland away from Denmark by force, or attacking Mexico or Canada, or trying to convert them into states. I mean, this looks batshit, you know what. You know, there was a movie, it reminds me of a million years ago by a comedian called Bananas, I think by Woody Allen, where it was a takeoff on, these sort of banana republics and the takeover by dictators. And, they all supported the coup, I guess, until the dictator, goes to the front steps and starts making his announcements, like Wednesdays will now be known as Sunday, and everyone will be wearing their underwear on the outside of their clothing. Now, this is sort of like what we're watching with Donald Trump. We're going to attack and take over Greenland, Mexico, Canada, make them into states. So majority of the cabinet has to agree to this. The vice president has to agree to it. They have to prepare a certification that goes to Congress, right? And then at that moment, when the certification is turned over to Congress, boom, vice president, at least for that moment, is president. Now, the guy who was president, let's say Trump in my example, he can object. If he objects, then within 21 days, Congress has to vote on it. This is the checks and balance system. 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate have to agree to put him back in. And if they don't, then he's out. So, once the 2/3 they have to agree that he was taken out. In other words, they're not voting to put him back in. They're voting that he was taken out properly. You're not going to get 2/3 of the Congress. Even MAGA is not going to acknowledge that Donald Trump is unfit for office and put J.D. Vance in. So I like the theory of the 25th Amendment. If we could have now, let's continue. One of the reasons that Donald Trump put some of these people in his cabinet positions is he thinks they're loyalists to him and they'll never invoke the 25th Amendment, but I'm not sure that's that true. I mean, Marco Rubio and him have sort of a détente, but I wouldn't call them close buddies. Howard Lutnick, Commerce, Steve Bessent, Treasury. He didn't really have a relationship with Steve Bessent before. So these aren't all lackeys around him. So could there be a majority of the cabinet listed there that would maybe side with removing him? Maybe. But, Donald Trump's tried hard to put loyalists in. So then you have that. Then we need 2/3 of the House and the Senate ultimately to make this happen. Even if you can get the vice president to go along with it, which I don't see ever happening. But maybe at the midterms, if the House and the Senate are returned to the Democrats, I think you get impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump. I think you get conviction and potential removal of him. And you get potentially the ability to get a 2/3 vote to remove Donald Trump if you get that high of a majority. I think it's more likely, frankly, that you get a impeachment and a conviction than you get a removal under the 25th Amendment. But I've seen a lot of chatter about the 25th Amendment, so I kind of wanted to dive in on it and give you the Popok analysis right here on Legal AF and the Midas Touch Network. So I'm going to continue to follow the erratic behavior. There's no doubt that the body of work so far for Donald Trump is abnormal, is aberrational, is rogue. His foreign policy non-existent, replaced with chaos and threats against allies, pushing them into the arms of the Chinese and pushing them into the arms of the Russians. There's no doubt about it. His domestic policy, cutting off funding to average Americans in their not-for-profit programs and grants, and school programs and health programs and senior programs and disability programs and veteran programs, is erratic, is rogue, is inhumane. His getting blocked already. Every other executive order has been blocked by a federal judge with more to come. I think we're averaging 1 suit a day. I think it's going to end up being 2 suits a day at the way that Donald Trump operates. I'll continue to follow all the ways to remove Donald Trump here on Legal AF. I'm glad you're here. Hit the blue subscribe button. Let's continue to grow this pro-democracy channel. Till my next reporting, I'm Michael Popok. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.